Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight, as you settle in and let your mind drift, I want to tell you a story. It's a story about the masks we wear, the lives we curate for strangers on the internet, and the dangerous illusion that perfection can be captured in a 15-second video. This is a story that unfolded in the golden light of San Diego, in a high-rise apartment overlooking the Pacific, where dreams of internet stardom collided with a darker reality that no filter could hide. Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let me tell you about Ali and Ana Abulaban. The story begins thousands of miles from California, on the subtropical island of Okinawa, Japan. The year was 2014. The island, with its turquoise waters and coral reefs, had long served as home to American military installations. A place where young service members from across the United States found themselves stationed far from home. Ali Nasser Abulaban was one of those young men, born in 1992 to a Middle Eastern family. Ali had grown up in a strict household. He would later describe his childhood as difficult, marked by the expectations placed on him as the eldest son. His father, he said, had been demanding, sometimes violent. Nothing Ali did seemed to be enough. The pressure to succeed, to be perfect, to meet impossible standards had followed him into adulthood like a shadow he could never shake. When Ali joined the United States Air Force in 2013, it seemed like a fresh start. He was assigned to work as a security forces officer, essentially a police officer on the base. But even in this new environment, Ali struggled. He had severe social anxiety, he later claimed, particularly around other men. The military structure, the hierarchy, the constant evaluation, it all brought back those feelings of inadequacy from his childhood. To cope with the loneliness and the pressure, Ali began drinking. Heavily. It helped him sleep, he said. It dulled the anxiety that gnawed at him in the quiet hours of the night. And then one evening at a bar near the base, everything changed. Her name was Anna Marie. She was 20 years old, originally from the Philippines, and she worked part-time at the establishment while serving her own military obligations. When Ali first saw her getting out of a car with friends, he was, in his own words, affected. Anna was striking, beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. Her smile lit up rooms. Her energy was infectious. They danced together that night. They talked, and soon after, Anna went through Ali's security checkpoint at the base. Her military identification card had expired, and Ali, seizing his chance, wrote his phone number on a ticket and handed it to her. For the next 2 months, they talked on Skype and over the phone. Their connection deepened. Friends who knew them then said there was genuine chemistry between them. Anna saw someone successful, someone with a good ranking in the military, someone who made her laugh. Ali saw someone who made him feel worthy, someone who could silence the critical voice in his head that sounded so much like his father. They seemed to everyone around them like a match made in heaven. But paradise in Okinawa wouldn't last. The incident that ended Ali's military career happened at a bar. The details remained disputed, obscured by alcohol and conflicting accounts. What was clear was this: Ali had been drinking. Anna was there. At some point, Ali got into an altercation. He later claimed he slipped and fell, crashing into Anna. But others said he had assaulted a friend of Anna's. Whatever truly happened that night, the consequences were severe. Ali was given a choice: face a court-martial or accept a voluntary discharge from the Air Force. He chose the latter. In 2015, he returned to Virginia, to his family in Bristow, his military career over before it had truly begun. Anna, meanwhile, returned to the Philippines with her family. The relationship, it seemed, had run its course. They were young, They had been stationed together in a foreign country. Perhaps it had just been a temporary connection, a bright moment in the difficulty of military life. But then Anna discovered she was pregnant. When Ali learned he was going to be a father, something shifted in him. He worked to secure a visa for Nana, a process that took time and patience. In January of 2017, Anna finally arrived in Virginia. They moved into a house together, and as Anna's pregnancy progressed, they prepared to become parents. On a spring day in 2017, their daughter Amira was born. Friends say Anna was transformed by motherhood. She adored her baby girl, dressing her in outfits that matched her own, posting pictures that radiated joy and pride. Motherhood gave Anna purpose and fulfillment. For Ali, fatherhood coincided with another dream taking shape. He had always wanted to be an actor, to be famous, to be seen. Living near Washington, D.C., he began experimenting with social media. He created accounts on Instagram and YouTube, posting short comedy sketches and impressions. He wasn't particularly original, but he was enthusiastic. He threw himself into the work with the intensity of someone who had something to prove. And then he discovered TikTok. Around 2019, Ali Abulaban found his audience. Under the username Jin Kid, he began posting videos that showcased his talent for impressions. He could mimic the gravelly voice of Tony Montana from Scarface, the distinctive cadence of rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine, the dramatic dialogue from the video game Skyrim. His videos were short, punchy, designed for the endless scroll of social media, and people watched. Hundreds of thousands of people, then millions. Ali's follower count climbed steadily upward. By 2020, he had hundreds of thousands of followers. By 2021, he was approaching 1 million. Each video brought thousands of views, sometimes millions. Comments poured in. People quoted his lines. They shared his content. They made him feel like what he'd always wanted to be, a star. Anna often helped with the videos. She would hold the camera, adjust the lighting, or appear in sketches alongside her husband. To their followers, they seemed like the perfect couple. Young, attractive, successful, living a life that others could only envy. They posted videos of themselves dancing around their home, captions declaring their relationship drama-free. They showed glimpses of their daughter, their life, their love. The persona that Jin Kid presented to the world was confident, funny, a little edgy. He snorted cocaine on live streams and laughed about it. He talked about his hustle, his grind, his dedication to his craft. He called himself an internet celebrity, and in the insular world of TikTok, where fame could be measured in followers and likes, perhaps he was. But behind the carefully curated content, behind the persona of Jin Kid, Ali Abulaban was struggling. The cocaine use that seemed performative on camera was in reality a serious addiction. The confidence he projected masked deep insecurity. The fame he'd achieved, rather than satisfying him, seemed to amplify his anxieties. And Anna was beginning to see the man behind the mask. Anna had friends in San Diego from her time in Japan. The city called to her, the ocean, the sunshine, the community of people she loved. She convinced Ali that California would be good for his career. They could collaborate with other influencers in Los Angeles. They could build their brand. They could live the dream. In February of 2021, the Abulaban family moved into the Spire, a luxury high-rise apartment complex in San Diego's East Village. Their unit was on the 35th floor, offering sweeping views of the city and the Pacific Ocean beyond. It was the kind of place that looked perfect on Instagram, the kind of backdrop that screamed success. But the move that was supposed to elevate their lives instead accelerated its unraveling. In San Diego, both Ali and Anna began partying more. Ali's cocaine use escalated from occasional to constant. His paranoia deepened. His jealousy, which had always simmered beneath the surface, began to boil over. And Anna, who had started building her own social media following, found herself the target of her husband's increasing resentment. Ali couldn't stand that Anna was gaining attention. He controlled how she spent her time, who she saw, where she went. If he didn't approve of a girl's night out, Anna didn't go. If he wanted her home, she came home. Friends watched as Ali isolated Anna, cutting her off from the support system she needed. The arguments grew louder and more frequent. Ali recorded many of them, preserving his own rage on video files saved to his phone. In these recordings, you can hear him berating Anna, demanding to know why she won't have sex with him, insisting that he brought her to America and therefore she belonged to him. His voice drips with entitlement and fury. Anna's responses are quieter, more measured, the voice of someone trying to de-escalate, trying to survive. Anna's friends saw the bruises. They heard the stories. They watched their vibrant, joyful friend become smaller, quieter, more afraid. The violence that had always lurked in Ollie's nature finally broke through completely. One night, during an argument fueled by cocaine and paranoia, Ollie's suspicions about Anna's fidelity reached a fever pitch. He believed she was texting another man, sending intimate photos. When the fight escalated, Ollie snapped. He rolled on top of Anna and punched her in the face. 3 times. His fists connected with her cheekbones, her nose, her jaw. Anna had every legal reason to call the police, to press charges, to get a restraining order. But like so many victims of domestic violence, she didn't. Perhaps she was afraid. Perhaps she hoped he would change. Perhaps she thought of their daughter and wanted to keep the family intact. But the abuse continued. In one recorded incident, you can see Ollie push Anna during an argument. She falls backward, her head striking the end of the bed with a sickening thud. Both of them were under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Their judgment impaired, their inhibitions dissolved. Friends say that Anna stayed for Amira. She was terrified that if she left Ollie, if she was deported from America, she would lose her daughter forever. Ali knew this fear and weaponized it, reminding Anna repeatedly that he had brought her to America, that she was only here because of him. In September of 2021, Anna finally went to the police. She reported the domestic abuse. Officers came to the apartment multiple times between July and October. There were 9 calls in total, each one documenting the deterioration of the marriage. Ali threatened suicide. On at least one occasion, Anna recorded him with a gun to his face while their daughter slept nearby. The videos Anna captured showed a man spiraling, unhinged, dangerous. Finally, on October 6th, 2021, Anna made a discovery that changed everything. A woman contacted her to tell her that Ali had cheated on her. Anna posted a video on TikTok, exposing Ali's infidelity, for someone whose entire identity was built on his carefully curated image. This public revelation was catastrophic. Ali threatened Anna, demanded she take the video down. She complied, but the damage was done. Thousands of people had already seen it. Anna moved in with a friend. The marriage was over. On October 18th, 2021, 3 days before the end, Ali agreed to move out of the apartment so Anna and Amira could return home. He checked into a Holiday Inn Express in Mission Bay. But before he left, Ali did 2 things. First, he made a secret copy of the electronic keycard that accessed their apartment. Second, he installed a listening application on his daughter's iPad, an app called Discord that would allow him to eavesdrop on conversations in the apartment in real time. Then he left. And he waited. The morning of October 21st, 2021 began like many others. Anna woke early to take Amira to school. It was a Thursday, the kind of beautiful autumn day that makes you grateful to live in Southern California. The sky was clear. The temperature was mild, I felt, perhaps, like it might be starting to improve. Didn't know that Ali had been to the apartment earlier that morning, while she and Amira were gone. Surveillance cameras captured him entering at 9:15 a.m. He was on his phone, and investigators later determined he had been calling Anna. "Where are you?" he demanded. "I know you're lying. I know you're cheating on me." Inside the apartment, Ali's rage manifested in destruction. He smashed a pumpkin on the floor. He threw Anna's clothes, what he called her slutty clothing, down the trash chute. He vandalized the space they had once shared, marking it with his anger and his sense of betrayal. Then he hid his daughter's iPad behind the bed in the primary bedroom, plugged it in, and left. He returned to his hotel room and waited, listening through the Discord app for any sign that Anna was with another man. Around 11 a.m., Anna returned home to find the apartment trashed. She called a friend, her voice shaky, explaining that Ali had vandalized their home. She said she was going to clean it up before Amira came home from school. so their daughter wouldn't be confused or scared. She said she was going to get a restraining order. She asked her friend to pick Amira up from school, and then she called Rayburn Cardenas Barron, known to everyone as Ray. Ray was 29 years old, a friend to both Ali and Anna, though Ali had long been jealous of him. Ray had once commented that Ali was lucky to have a wife as beautiful as Anna, and Ali had never forgotten it. In Ali's paranoid mind, Ray represented everything he feared. Another man who might take Anna away from him. Ray agreed to come over and help Anna clean up the mess. He arrived around 2 in the afternoon. Surveillance cameras show him and Anna entering the building together, taking the elevator up to the 35th floor. In his hotel room, Ali was listening. Through the iPad hidden in the bedroom, he could hear Anna and Ray talking, laughing, the sound of movement as they cleaned, and then he heard something that made his blood run cold. A man's voice, relaxed and friendly, and the sound of Anna giggling. Ali grabbed his gun. He did several lines of cocaine. It's probably the most coke I've ever done, he later testified. Then he got in his car and drove to the Spire. He parked in the garage. He took the elevator to the 35th floor, and he started recording audio on his phone. The neighbor's security camera captured what happened next. You can't see into the apartment, but the audio is crystal clear. The sound of a door opening, the door closing, and then within 3 seconds, the first gunshot. 5 more shots followed in rapid succession. Between the 6th and 7th shots, you can hear Anna scream. It's a sound that haunted everyone who heard it in court. A sound of pure terror and betrayal. And then the 7th shot. And then silence. According to the medical examiner, Ray was shot 3 times in the head and neck, at such close range that soot was found on his cheek. Anna was shot once, in the middle of her forehead, execution style. In the audio recording after the shooting stops, you can hear Ali's voice. Anna, he shouts. Anna. His voice is desperate, as if he cannot believe what he has just done, as if calling her name might somehow undo it. But Anna Abolaban was dead. Ray Barron was dead. And Ali Abolaban, still holding his gun, walked out into the hallway. The security camera in the hallway captured Ali immediately after the shooting. He's on the phone with his mother, Dolly O'Wara, and he's confessing. I killed him, he tells her. His voice is shaking. I shot Anna. I shot them both. His mother on the other end of the line is screaming, crying, trying to understand what her son has just told her. Ali took a picture of the bodies. Anna and Ray slumped together on the couch, their blood soaking into the cushions, and sent it to his mother. Then he left the building. He got in his car, and he drove to Amira's school. Ali picked up his 5-year-old daughter, telling her teachers that he was there to collect her. As they drove away from the school, just before police pulled him over on the freeway, Ali told his daughter something that would haunt everyone who heard about it later. I hurt mommy, he said. Officers arrested Ali Abolaban on the freeway with his daughter still in the car. They approached with weapons drawn. Do you have any weapons? They asked. Ali was compliant, his hands visible, his demeanor strangely calm for someone who had just committed a double murder. At the police station, Ali confessed, but over time his story would change. Initially he admitted to the killings. Later he would claim he couldn't remember shooting Anna, that he'd been in a fog, that the cocaine had clouded his judgment. He would say he'd acted in the heat of passion, driven to madness by betrayal. But the evidence told a different story. The secret key, the hidden listening device, the cocaine he'd done before driving to the apartment with his gun, the recording he'd started before walking through the door, the fact that he'd shot Ray 3 times and Anna once, cleanly, efficiently, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't passion. This was premeditation. It took nearly 3 years for Ali Abolaban to face trial. During that time, he gave an interview to a local news reporter from his jail cell. In it, he claimed that social media had made him snap, that the fame had messed with his brain, that the attention had made him violent and aggressive. Anna's friends who watched the interview were struck by something chilling. Ali seemed more devastated about losing his business, his social media presence, than about losing his wife. After the interview, someone posted a video on YouTube on his behalf, featuring a phone call where Ali apologized to his fans for not being able to make more content. He never apologized to Anna's family. He never apologized to Ray's family. At a preliminary hearing in January of 2022, Ali's volatile nature was on full display. When a detective testified that the relationship between Anna and Ray had become romantic, Ali exploded. He screamed at the judge, his face red with rage. "You think I wanted this?" he shouted. "For my 5-year-old daughter? Who are you? I'm hurt. My life is destroyed." The trial finally began on May 1st, 2024. It would last nearly a month. Ali Abulaban took the stand in his own defense. Something defendants rarely do. Over 3 days of testimony, he spoke about his abusive childhood, his discharge from the military, his relationship with Anna, and the day he killed her. His testimony was volatile. He was calm one moment, crying the next, erupting in anger when the prosecutor pushed him on difficult questions. At one point, he interrupted to ask the judge, "What happens when the question is forcing me to say something specific?" The most heated exchange came when the prosecutor asked about other incidents of violence in Ali's life. "And I saw you slap your mom, right?" the prosecutor asked. "She did not see that." Ali shot back. "And I can't ask her, right?" the prosecutor pressed. "Because you killed her." "That's not fair," Ali said, his voice rising. "That's so inappropriate." The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had surveillance footage showing Ali entering the building at 2:50 p.m. on October 21st, riding the elevator to the 35th floor, entering the apartment. They had the audio recording from the neighbor's camera. The gunshots, Anna's scream, Ali calling her name. They had the audio Ali himself had recorded. They had his confession to his mother. They had the photograph he'd taken of the bodies. They had evidence of his searches on Google in the days after the murders. Chopped bodies, trash can. They played the recordings for the jury. Ali berating Anna, threatening her, claiming ownership over her because he'd brought her to America. They presented evidence of the listening device, the secret key, the planning that had gone into the murder. Deputy District Attorney Taryn Brast made the case plainly. He was so possessive and controlling of Anna that if he could not have her, no one could. She couldn't live, and any man she was with could not live either. Ali's defense attorney, Jody Green, argued that her client had been driven to the brink by Anna's rejection, that his judgment was clouded by cocaine and mental health struggles stemming from childhood trauma. She claimed the killings were crimes of passion, not premeditated murder. She pointed to Ali's emotional state, his addiction, his deteriorating mental health. But the prosecutor's rebuttal was devastating. Heat of passion does not apply when you walk into an apartment that you had bugged, with a key card you were not supposed to have, to a fight that no one else knew was happening but you. And you brought a gun. That is not heat of passion. The jury deliberated for several days. On May 29, 2024, they reached their verdict, guilty, on both counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances of committing multiple murders. When the verdict was read, Ray's sister Jordana described feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "It was such a relief," she said. "Finally, my mom can be at peace." Ali Abulaban's sentencing took place on June 28, 2024. It was by all accounts an emotionally charged proceeding. Victim impact statements were read. Anna's friends and family spoke about the vibrant, loving woman they had lost. Ray's family spoke about a kind man who had simply tried to help a friend and paid for it with his life. Ali himself addressed the court, asking for leniency. "Being sent to prison forever feels like I'm being sent to hell," he said. But Judge Jeffrey Fraser, who had presided over the trial, was unmoved. He told Ali he had serious reservations that the defendant was truly remorseful. "He's a very selfish person," the judge said. "As I think the jury saw, the bottom line here is, he will die in prison. He will never be a free man. He will take his last breath there." Ali was sentenced to 2 consecutive 25 years to life sentences. Life without the possibility of parole. At 32 years old, Ali Abulaban had essentially been given a death sentence. He would spend the rest of his days behind bars. In the courtroom, when the sentence was announced, there was shouting and crying, and then cheering. Ray's family and Anna's friends felt, perhaps for the first time since October 21st, 2021, that justice had been served. Ali Abulaban, has since filed an appeal. He claims he was not properly convicted because, in his words, a murderer is somebody who planned, plotted, and premeditated to kill a person. And that's not me. He insists he never planned or intended to kill Anna or Ray, that it was a crime of passion, that he deserves a chance at rehabilitation, at rebuilding a relationship with his daughter. But the evidence speaks for itself, and the lives lost speak louder. The story of Ali and Anna Abelaban is, in many ways, a story about our modern age, about the performative nature of social media, where we curate perfect lives for strangers while hiding our pain behind filters and clever captions, about how fame, even minor internet fame, can warp a person's sense of reality, making them believe they deserve worship, that their needs supersede everyone else's. Clinical psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston, interviewed for a documentary about the case, noted something significant. Ali's favorite character to impersonate was Tony Montana from Scarface, a violent, narcissistic anti-hero who famously declares, "Say hello to my little friend before unleashing violence." The choice, Johnston suggested, was revealing. Ali didn't just play violent characters, he admired them. He wanted to be them. Rolling Stone journalist Andrea Marks, who covered the case, put it this way: social media can be really dangerous in the hands of the wrong person. He clearly had a very unhealthy relationship to social media that muddied his understanding of reality, and seemed to shape his impression of what was an acceptable way to behave. Anna's friends remember her differently. They remember her laughter, her warmth, her dedication to her daughter. They remember a woman who tried so hard to make her marriage work, who stayed far too long because she was afraid of losing her child, who finally found the courage to leave and was killed for it. Ray's family remembers a kind man who loved children, who was looking forward to becoming a father himself someday, who simply tried to help a friend in need. Both of them died on a couch in a luxury apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, killed by a man who claimed to love one of them and saw the other as a threat to his ownership of her. In the years since, TikTok has removed Ali's account. His videos, which once garnered millions of views, are gone. The persona of Jin Kid exists now only in clips used as evidence in court and documentaries about his crimes. The followers have moved on to other content creators, other personalities, other 15-second bursts of entertainment. Amira, Ali and Anna's daughter, is growing up without her mother and without her father. She will carry the weight of this story for the rest of her life, always knowing that her father killed her mother. As for Ali Obalaban, he sits in a California prison, filing appeals, insisting he is not a murderer by the legal definition. But 2 people are dead by his hand, and all the followers in the world, all the views, all the fame he once chased so desperately, cannot change that fact. And so we come to the end of our first story, a story about jealousy and control, about the dangerous illusion of perfection, about the masks we wear and the monsters that sometimes hide behind them. Let this story settle in your mind as you drift towards sleep. Let it remind you that the lives we see on social media are rarely the truth, that everyone we meet is fighting battles we cannot see, that fame and followers are poor substitutes for genuine human connection and love. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. Tonight we'll explore a case that touched the heart of a nation, not with urgency or alarm, but with the gentle reverence it deserves. This is the story of Samantha Runyon, a 5-year-old girl whose brief life became a catalyst for change, whose memory inspired protection for countless other children. So we'll walk through this story together, slowly, carefully, honoring every detail while you find your peace in the telling. The summer of 2002 arrived in Southern California with all the warmth and promise that the season brings. In the city of Stanton, nestled in Orange County just west of Anaheim, life moved at the unhurried pace of July afternoons. Children played outside until the golden light began to fade. Families gathered on patios and in small yards, savoring the last hours of daylight. Samantha Bree Runyon was born on July 26, 1996, in Boston, Massachusetts. By 2002, she and her mother Erin had made their home in Stanton in the condominium complex called Smoke Tree. It was a modest, quiet place. The kind of neighborhood where children could be children, where scraped knees and shared laughter filled the summer air. Samantha was 5 years old that July, with just 11 days remaining until her 6th birthday. Those who knew her remember a child full of light. She loved to put on performances for her family, tap dancing across living room floors, her small feet creating rhythms only she could hear. She adored dressing up in princess costumes, twirling in imaginary ballrooms. Sunflowers captivated her. Their bright faces turned toward the sun mirrored something in her own nature, something joyful and unguarded. On the 15th of July, a Monday, Samantha had enjoyed what can only be described as a perfect day. She spent time with her grandparents, and together they drove to the pier where they shared ice cream and watched the ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. It was the kind of simple, beautiful day that childhood is made of, the kind that later becomes precious beyond measure in memory. When they returned home that evening, Samantha was eager to play. At around 6:30 in the evening, she went outside to the front courtyard of the apartment complex. Her friend Sarah Ann, who was 6 years old and lived nearby, joined her. The two girls were playing a board game on the lawn, their voices bright with the easy joy of friendship. The evening was warm, the sky still holding light. Everything felt safe. Everything felt right. But sometimes the world shifts in an instant. Sometimes evil arrives on an ordinary evening, in an ordinary place, wearing an ordinary face. Sarah would later remember the green car. She would remember how it passed by them once, slowly, then circled the block and came back. At the time it seemed like nothing, just another vehicle in the neighborhood. But children notice things. They remember details that adults might miss. The car stopped near where the girls were playing. A man got out. He was Hispanic with slicked back brown hair and a mustache. He wore a powder blue button-down shirt. His appearance was unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of face that might blend into any crowd. He approached the girls with a question. "Have you seen a little puppy?" he asked. It was an old trick, a time-worn lure. Most children are taught to be wary of strangers, but the mention of a lost puppy, something small and helpless, something that needed help, could make even the most cautious child pause. Samantha asked about the puppy's size. She was curious, kind-hearted. In that moment, she was simply a little girl who loved animals and wanted to help. And then in the space of a heartbeat, everything changed. The man grabbed Samantha. She screamed. She kicked. She struggled with all the strength her small body possessed. Sarah watched in horror as her friend was lifted, thrown into the back seat of the green car. Samantha's screams cut through the evening air, desperate, terrified cries for help. Through it all, Samantha continued to fight. Even as the man forced her into the vehicle, even as he climbed into the driver's seat, she resisted. And then, for just a moment, as the car began to pull away, Samantha looked at Sarah through the window. Their eyes met. One last connection between two friends. One last moment of recognition before the green car sped away, carrying Samantha into the gathering dusk. Sarah ran. She ran to tell her mother what had happened. Within minutes, Erin Runyon rushed outside, but she was too late. The car was gone. Her daughter was gone. By 7 o'clock that evening, the Orange County Sheriff's Department had been notified. By nightfall, a massive search operation was underway. In those first hours, hope remained. More than 150 deputies from the Sheriff's Department mobilized. 30 FBI agents joined the effort. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Bloodhounds were brought in to track any scent. Officers went door to door throughout the neighborhood, speaking with residents, checking security cameras, searching for any clue, any lead. A nationwide alert went out. Given Stanton's proximity to the Mexican border, authorities in Mexico were also contacted. Every law enforcement agency in the region understood the urgency. A 5-year-old girl had been taken. Every minute mattered. Erin Runyon stood on the lawn outside her apartment complex and spoke to the media. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice breaking with desperate hope. She pleaded with the man who had taken her daughter. "Please," she said, "bring her home." She pleaded with the public for help, for any information, for someone somewhere to have seen something. Sarah Unn, though only 6 years old herself, proved to be an extraordinary witness. She provided investigators with detailed descriptions of the man and his car. She worked with a sketch artist, and together they created a composite drawing of the suspect. The description was clear. Hispanic male, 25 to 40 years old, slicked back brown hair, mustache, wearing a powder blue shirt. The vehicle was a 2-door light green car with chrome wheels, possibly a Honda or Acura. Sarah had noticed an H on the car, a detail that would prove significant. Throughout that night and into the next day, the search continued. Officers combed through neighborhoods, followed up on tips, interviewed potential witnesses. Erin Runyon remained in front of the cameras, her face becoming a symbol of every parent's worst nightmare. The entire community rallied, hoping for a miracle, praying for Samantha's safe return. But sometimes prayers go unanswered. Sometimes the worst fears are realized. On the afternoon of July 16th, less than 24 hours after Samantha's abduction, 2 men were driving along Ortega Highway near Lake Elsinore, a small city in Riverside County, approximately 50 miles south of Stanton. The area near the intersection of Kill and Truck Trail and Ortega Highway was remote, popular with hang gliders, but otherwise quiet and isolated. At approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, the 2 men saw something lying beside the road. At first, from a distance, it wasn't clear what they were seeing, but as they drew closer, the terrible truth became apparent. It was a child's body. She was naked, positioned on the ground in what investigators would later describe as if she had been posed, displayed like a trophy. Even in death, there was a deliberate cruelty to how she had been left. The men immediately contacted authorities. Officers from both Orange County and Riverside County responded to the scene. The body matched the description of Samantha Runyon, but formal identification would have to wait. The crime scene was carefully preserved, every inch documented, every piece of potential evidence collected with painstaking care. By that evening, Erin Runyon received the news that every parent dreads. Her daughter had been found. Samantha was dead. The autopsy performed the following morning revealed the extent of the horror that Samantha had endured. She had been sexually assaulted, both vaginally and anally. She had suffered at least 2 blows to her head, injuries inflicted at least 30 minutes before her death, causing her brain to swell. The pathologist determined that Samantha died from mechanical asphyxiation through compression of the neck, with the blunt force trauma to her head contributing significantly to her death. The exact method of the neck compression could not be determined, whether by hands, a ligature, or some other means. But the conclusion was clear. Samantha had been strangled. The time of death was estimated to be between 8 o'clock in the evening on July 15th and 2 o'clock in the morning on July 16th. This meant that Samantha had been alive for several hours after her abduction. She had been kept somewhere, subjected to unspeakable horrors, before finally being killed and her body dumped in the remote hills. The grief that swept through the community was overwhelming. More than 4,000 people attended Samantha's funeral. Neighbors, strangers, people who had never met the little girl, but who were moved by her story, by the tragic loss of such a young life. But grief, in this case, was accompanied by determination. Someone had done this. Someone had taken Samantha, assaulted her, murdered her, and left her body on the side of a road. And investigators were determined to find him. From the beginning, forensic evidence played a crucial role. The crime scene yielded significant physical evidence, and investigators began the meticulous process of analysis. Samantha's body itself told a story. Beneath her fingernails, forensic technicians found traces of DNA, the killer's DNA. Samantha, even at 5 years old, had fought. She had scratched and clawed at her attacker. She had left behind evidence that would eventually lead to his identification. A tip line was established, and calls began flooding in. Among the many leads, one name kept appearing: Alejandro Avila. Alejandro Avila, was 27 years old in July 2002. He lived in Lake Elsinore with his sister Elvira, and other family members lived nearby in the same apartment complex. He worked at a medical equipment factory, a job that seemed ordinary, unremarkable. But Alejandro Avila was not unremarkable. He had a history, a disturbing history that would prove critical to the investigation. In January 2001, just 18 months before Samantha's murder, Alejandro Avila had been tried for sexually molesting 3 young girls. The victims were the 9-year-old daughter of his then-girlfriend, Lisbeth Veglan, and 2 relatives of the girlfriend. The alleged incidents had occurred in 1999 during weekends when Avila was left alone with the children. The trial had hinged on the testimony of the young victims, who described being touched inappropriately, coerced, threatened. The defense argued that the stories were inconsistent, that the children might have been coached by adults, that there was no physical evidence to support the allegations. One of the jurors later stated that the girls' accounts seemed to change when they were pressed on details like how many times the abuse had occurred. The jury, after deliberation, had sided with Avila. He was acquitted on all counts. The acquittal had emboldened him. His sister Elvira later testified that after the trial they had watched a movie together called Double Jeopardy, a film about a woman who cannot be tried twice for the same crime. After watching it, Alejandro had turned to his sister and said something chilling. "I could do anything I want to that little girl, and I can't be charged for it because of double jeopardy." It was a statement that revealed his mindset, his understanding of the legal system, and perhaps his intentions. When investigators learned about Alejandro Avila, several details immediately stood out. He fit the physical description provided by Sarah Ann. He owned a green car, and critically, he had been a frequent visitor to the Smoke Tree condominium complex, the very place where Samantha lived. His former girlfriend's family had lived there. He knew the area. He had been there before. On the day of Samantha's abduction, Alejandro had been scheduled to cook dinner for his family at around 6 o'clock in the evening. Instead, he had left the apartment and driven around Southern California. His alibi was weak, inconsistent. He claimed he had been at the mall, but there was no evidence to support this. 3 days after Samantha's abduction, on July 18th, investigators executed search warrants. They searched Alejandro's apartment, his mother's residence, and most importantly, his car. The green car. What they found was damning. Inside Alejandro's vehicle, forensic technicians discovered Samantha's DNA. It was found on the inside of the car door, in a small amount of clear liquid that was consistent with tears or mucus. The child had cried in that car. She had left traces of herself behind. And beneath Samantha's fingernails, the DNA matched Alejandro Avila. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. The connection was undeniable. On July 18th, 2002, Alejandro Avila was arrested and charged with kidnapping, murder, and 2 counts of forcible lewd acts on a child. As the investigation deepened, authorities uncovered more disturbing details about Alejandro Avila's life and mindset. A search of his laptop computer revealed extensive collections of child pornography. He had been actively seeking out and downloading images and videos of child sexual abuse. Further investigation revealed that Alejandro had been communicating online with other individuals who shared his illicit interest in children. In these communications, he had openly discussed his own actions. He had admitted to molesting young girls. Disturbingly, he had expressed that he didn't believe his actions were wrong, unless the child was related to him. It was a twisted moral framework, one that justified harm to children, while drawing arbitrary lines about which children could be victimized. Investigators also discovered that on July 15th, the day of Samantha's abduction, Alejandro had booked a room at a Comfort Inn motel. This was significant. Based on the timeline and the evidence, authorities believed that Samantha had been taken to this motel room, that she had been kept there alive for several hours. It was in that room investigators believed that the worst of the assault and ultimately the murder had taken place. The pieces were coming together. The physical evidence, the digital evidence, the timeline, the history, all of it pointed to one conclusion. Alejandro Avila had abducted Samantha Runyon. He had sexually assaulted her. He had murdered her, and he had dumped her body in the hills, hoping it would appear as if she were some kind of trophy. The case went to trial in March 2005, nearly 3 years after Samantha's death. The trial took place in Santa Ana in Orange County Superior Court. before Judge William Froberg. The proceedings were closely watched, both locally and nationally. The story of Samantha Runyon had captured public attention from the beginning, and now, finally, there would be accountability. Alejandro Avila's defense team, led by public defenders Denise Gregg and Philip Zalewski, argued that the prosecution's case was weak and circumstantial. They challenged the DNA evidence, suggesting it had been improperly collected or analyzed. They even went so far as to suggest that evidence found in Avila's car had been planted by investigators, a claim prosecutors vehemently denied. The defense argued that the timeline didn't work, that it would have been impossible for Alejandro to have committed all these crimes in the time frame the prosecution alleged. They called witnesses who had stayed at the Comfort Inn that same night, who testified they had not seen Alejandro with a child. They brought their own forensic experts to cast doubt on the time of death estimates. But the prosecution's case was strong. Assistant District Attorney David Brent presented the DNA evidence methodically, showing how Samantha's genetic material was found in Avila's car, and how Avila's DNA was found under Samantha's fingernails. The probability of these matches being coincidental was infinitesimal. The prosecution also presented evidence of Avila's prior molestation accusations. Despite his acquittal in 2001, Judge Froberg ruled that testimony from the 3 previous alleged victims could be heard. The girls, now older, described in detail the pattern of abuse, a pattern that bore disturbing similarities to what had happened to Samantha. They testified about medical tubing and equipment used in the assaults, details specific enough to establish a signature, a method. This testimony was crucial. It established that Alejandro Avila had a predisposition towards sexually abusing young girls. It suggested a motive for why he might have killed Samantha, to avoid another trial, another accusation, another potential conviction. Sarah Ann also took the witness stand. Now 9 years old, she clutched a stuffed animal. As she testified, she described the day her friend was taken, how the green car had passed by once, then circled back, how the man had asked about a puppy, how he had suddenly grabbed Samantha and thrown her into the car. When she was in the car, Sarah said, her voice small but clear, she just looked at me. The courtroom was silent. The image of that final look between two friends was heartbreaking. Throughout the trial, Alejandro Avila showed no emotion. He sat at the defense table, his expression blank, his demeanor detached. When given the opportunity to speak or to show remorse, he declined. His defense attorney spoke for him, but he himself remained silent. On April 28, 2005, after deliberation, the jury returned with their verdicts. They found Alejandro Avila guilty on all counts: kidnapping, murder during the commission of a kidnapping, murder during the commission of lewd and lascivious acts on a child under the age of 14, and 2 counts of forcible lewd acts. His special circumstances meant he was eligible for the death penalty. When the verdicts were read, one female juror wept. Alejandro Avila bowed his head toward the defense table but showed no other reaction. The penalty phase of the trial followed. The defense presented testimony about Avila's upbringing, painting a picture of a family plagued by alcoholism, violence, and sexual abuse, spanning generations. A forensic psychologist testified that the Avila household had virtually every risk factor imaginable for producing a damaged individual. Some family members even testified that Alejandro himself had been sexually abused as a child. But Judge Froberg expressed skepticism about this testimony, noting that these claims had never been mentioned before, that they seemed conveniently timed to garner sympathy. On May 16, 2005, the jury returned with their recommendation: death. Alejandro Avila should be sentenced to die for what he had done to Samantha Runyon at the formal sentencing hearing on July 22, 2005, exactly 3 years and 1 week after Samantha's abduction. Judge Froberg imposed the death sentence. He stated that the evidence showed Avila had gone hunting that day, that his actions were fueled by child pornography and a predatory mindset. He described how Samantha's body had been left posed as if she was some sort of trophy. Before the sentence was handed down, Erin Runyon was given the opportunity to address her daughter's killer. Her words were raw, furious, filled with a mother's grief and rage. She fought, Erin said, her voice shaking. I know she fought. I know she looked at you with those amazing brown eyes and you still wanted to kill her. I don't understand it. I never will. She told Avila that she didn't want him to have the release of execution. She wanted him to live, to rot in prison, forgotten in what she called the abyss, where no one would care about him. Alejandro Avila showed no emotion. He sat with his head up, looking straight ahead, silent to the end. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison in Marin County, California, where he remains on death row to this day. In the aftermath of Samantha's murder, Aaron Runyon faced an impossible choice: to be consumed by grief, or to find a way forward, to create meaning from the meaningless, to ensure that her daughter's brief life would matter. She chose the latter. In the months following Samantha's death, Aaron founded the Joyful Child Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing crimes against children. The foundation's mission is to educate, empower, and unite families and communities in protecting children from abuse, violence, exploitation, and abduction. Erin threw herself into understanding how such tragedies happen and, more importantly, how they can be prevented. She studied child development, child psychology, and the dynamics of abuse. She learned that many perpetrators were themselves victims of abuse as children, that the cycle of violence perpetuates itself across generations unless it is interrupted. The foundation developed the Be Brave, Be Safe empowerment programs, including curriculum for elementary schools and community-based workshops. The focus is on empowering children themselves, teaching them about body autonomy, about recognizing unsafe situations, about trusting their instincts, about knowing that they have the right to say no and to seek help. Erin's approach is notable for its focus on reaching the most vulnerable children, those in low-income areas, in homeless shelters, in domestic violence shelters, children whose parents might never sign them up for safety workshops. These are the children most at risk, and Erin is determined to reach them. The foundation also works with parents, educators, and community leaders, providing training and resources to create environments where children are protected and empowered. Samantha's murder also led to systemic changes. At the time of her abduction, California did not have an Amber Alert system in place. The Amber Alert, named for 9-year-old Amber Hagerman, who was kidnapped and murdered in Texas in 1996, is an emergency alert system that broadcasts information about child abductions to the public through various media, including freeway signs, radio, television, and now cell phone. Following Samantha's death, California implemented the Amber Alert system. Just weeks after it was activated, 2 teenage girls in Quartz Hills were kidnapped and assaulted. Vigilant drivers, seeing the alert on freeway signs, spotted the suspect vehicle and notified authorities. Officers engaged in a gun battle with the kidnapper and successfully rescued the girls from what appeared to be imminent danger. Aaron Runyon has said, "I'd like to think it wasn't for nothing. A lot of children have been protected because of her. She was the catalyst for the California Amber Alert." The foundation hosts annual events, including the Brave Race, a 5-kilometer run that raises funds for the foundation's programs. The race is named after Samantha's favorite motto, "Be Brave." It's a fitting tribute to a little girl who in her final moments fought with all her strength, who left behind evidence that would bring her killer to justice. Erin has also launched a podcast called Let's Talk Joy, in which she discusses lessons learned about finding and protecting joy in the aftermath of unimaginable loss. It's a remarkable testament to resilience, to the human capacity to find light even in the darkest circumstances. 20 years after Samantha's death, Erin continues her advocacy work. She speaks at conferences, trains educators and community leaders, and tirelessly promotes child safety programs. She has transformed her grief into action, her loss into protection for others. As we come to the end of this story, it's worth pausing to reflect on what it means, what we can take from it. The murder of Samantha Runyon is a story of evil, certainly. It's a story of a predator who targeted a vulnerable child, who exploited her kindness and curiosity, who subjected her to horrors no one should ever endure. It's a story of a justice system that failed once. In 2001, when it acquitted Alejandro Avila despite the testimony of 3 young girls, and of the tragic consequences of that failure. But it's also a story of resilience, of a 6-year-old witness who provided crucial details despite her fear and trauma, of investigators who worked tirelessly to collect evidence and build a case, of a community that rallied together, that refused to let this crime be forgotten, of a mother who chose to honor her daughter's memory, not through endless grief alone, but through action, through protection, through ensuring that other children might be spared. Samantha Runyon lived for only 5 years, but her impact extends far beyond those brief years. The Amber Alert system in California has helped save countless children, The Joyful Child Foundation has educated thousands of families. The programs developed in Samantha's memory have empowered vulnerable children, giving them tools to recognize danger and seek help. In the end, perhaps that's the most important part of this story, that even in the face of tragedy, we can choose how we respond. We can choose to create light from darkness, to protect rather than despair, to transform grief into purpose. Samantha loved sunflowers, those bright faces always turning toward the sun. In a way, that's what her mother has done. Turn toward the light even when surrounded by darkness. Turn toward hope, even when confronted with the worst humanity has to offer. Turn toward protecting joy, even when joy seems impossibly far away. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. In the rolling hills of Cherokee County, Georgia, there stood a sprawling estate that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. 10 acres of carefully manicured land, tucked away on Purcell Lane in a quiet community called Free Home. The property was home to Gary Wayne Ferris, a man known to everyone as Big Daddy, and in many ways the nickname suited him perfectly. Gary was born on June 27th, 1960, in the small city of Tuscumbia, Alabama. He was the eldest of 4 children, raised in a household that, while not wealthy, was rich in love and warmth. From an early age, Gary knew what he wanted. He would tell his family and friends that he was going to be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a successful one. And Gary Ferris was nothing if not a man of his word. He met Melody when they were both young, barely more than teenagers. There was something between them, a spark that seemed promising at first. They married young, and while Gary was still in his sophomore year of college, they welcomed their first child, a son they named Chris. Being a father so young might have derailed some people, but not Gary. He worked nights to support his growing family, coming home during the day to help care for the baby. He studied relentlessly, pushing through law school with a determination that impressed everyone who knew him. By the time he passed the bar in Alabama, Gary and Melody had built what looked like a solid foundation. They would go on to have 3 more children, Scott, Emily, and Amanda. 4 kids. A growing career. The American dream, piece by piece. In 1995, Gary's career took a significant turn. The prestigious law firm Burr & Forman asked him to open and manage a new office in Atlanta, Georgia. It was the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. Gary accepted, passed the Georgia State Bar, and threw himself into building something extraordinary. He specialized in commercial real estate law and business law, fields that demanded precision, intelligence, and an understanding of complex financial structures. Gary excelled at all of it. His colleagues at Burr & Forman would later describe him as brilliant. A workaholic, yes, but never at the expense of his family. He coached his children's sports teams. He made time for family dinners. Early on, the Ferris family vacations were modest, often tagged on to wherever Gary had a law seminar. But as the years passed and Gary's reputation grew, so did the family's comfort. They moved to that beautiful 10-acre property on Purcell Lane. Life, by all appearances, was good. Gary's law partner would remember him as generous, almost to a fault. If someone in the family needed money, Gary was there with his credit card, a loan for a down payment, a gift to help someone through a rough patch. Gary was, as one person put it, the family Santa Claus. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, weighed around 300 pounds, and had a presence that filled any room he entered. Big Daddy indeed, but beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, cracks were forming. Deep cracks. By the time the 2010s arrived, the marriage between Gary and Melody had changed. Not suddenly, but gradually, the way a foundation settles and shifts over years. They still lived in the same house, but they had begun living separate lives under that same roof. Gary had claimed the basement as his domain. Melody occupied the upper floors. They coexisted, but the warmth that once connected them had cooled to something distant and transactional. Financial tension began to define their relationship. Gary controlled the family finances completely. He was, after all, the sole breadwinner. His income from Bird and Foreman supported everyone, including their adult children who still relied on him financially. But Melody felt stifled. She would later tell people that she had to ask permission to spend money, that she felt trapped in a gilded cage. There were other complications. Whispers of affairs. On Melody's part, there were multiple relationships over the years. One lasted from around 2008 to 2010. Another connection would prove to be even more significant. A relationship with a man named Roy Barton, known to everyone as Rusty. Rusty lived in Tennessee, and Melody would drive hours to spend time with him. She used burner phones to communicate with him secretly, a detail that would later seem telling. In the 6 months before Gary's death, Melody and Rusty exchanged over 3,000 text messages. Gary, too, had formed an emotional connection with someone outside his marriage. His legal assistant, Angela Phillips, testified later that she and Gary had grown close, very close. They shared an intimate relationship for about a year and a half. Though Angela would say she kept things professional after meeting Melody, still the connection was there. Gary confided in Angela about his marriage troubles, about Melody's spending, about her affairs. Angela would recall something chilling that Gary told her once. He said that if he died mysteriously, she would know what to tell Datline. It was said as a dark joke, perhaps, but the words would echo later with terrible significance. The family dynamics were equally strained. Gary's adult children had complicated relationships with their parents. Chris and Scott, the two oldest sons, relied on their father financially. Scott in particular lived on the property with his parents, managing day-to-day operations of the farm. His work and personal expenses were all covered by Gary. But there was tension. Gary sent Scott a text message just weeks before his death that read, "Your stealing money is out of control." Money. It always came back to money. In a family where one man controlled all the resources, where adult children depended on their father's generosity, where a wife felt financially imprisoned, money became both glue and poison. The summer of 2018 arrived hot and humid in Cherokee County. July 3rd was a Tuesday, a day that would later be reconstructed minute by investigators trying to piece together what happened. That afternoon, Gary was at work, responding to emails from his assistant Angela as usual. He was known for being quick to reply, always on top of his correspondence. But around 3:30 in the afternoon, the emails stopped. Angela found this unusual, but not alarming. Not yet. Gary's last known communications placed him alive on the evening of July 3rd. His cell phone records would later show activity until around 6:24 p.m. on July 4th. And then nothing. The phone went silent. The last location ping came from the cell tower near the Purcell Lane property. Back at the house, Melody told a different story. She said she last saw Gary on July 3rd. She claimed he had started a fire on the property in the days prior, something to burn debris and brush. This was not unusual. The property required maintenance, and burn piles were common in rural areas. July 4th passed. July 5th arrived. And that's when everything changed. Scott Ferris, the second eldest son, was the one who made the discovery. He walked out onto the property that morning, heading toward the burn pile about 100 yards from the main house. What he found there would haunt him forever. Human remains, extensively burned, in a pile that measured about 15 feet wide and 5 inches deep. Scott called 911. The recording captured his panic, his voice breaking as he tried to explain what he'd found. When the ambulance arrived, a paramedic would later testify that Scott met them at the end of the driveway, repeating over and over that he knew what a burned body looked like from his time serving in Iraq. First responders arrived at the scene within minutes. Cherokee County Sheriff's deputies secured the area. At first, they wondered if this might have been an accident. Perhaps Gary had suffered a medical episode and fallen into the fire. He was known to have spells, moments of exhaustion and dry mouth that would overcome him suddenly. Could he have collapsed into the flames? But as investigators began their work, that theory crumbled quickly. The forensic team worked through the night on July 5th, documenting everything, sifting through ash and bone. The remains were so badly burned that only about 33 pounds were recovered from a man who had weighed 300 pounds in life. Dental records would eventually confirm what everyone feared. This was Gary Ferris. And then came the discovery that transformed everything from possible accident to definite homicide. Lodged in one of Gary's ribs, investigators found a bullet. A .38 caliber round. Gary Ferris had been shot. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was called in. Their crime lab would spend months analyzing every piece of evidence from the scene. But even before those results came back, investigators knew they were dealing with murder. The question was, who? Detective Daniel Hayes from the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office took the lead on the investigation. He and his team began interviewing everyone connected to the family, and what they found was a household divided. A family where nearly everyone had some reason to want Gary Ferris dead, or at least some tension with him over money. When investigators entered the house that first day, one officer noticed the smell of cleaning solution, possibly bleach. They began searching the home methodically. In the basement, they found blood. Not just a spot or two, but a trail. Blood in what appeared to be the master bedroom. Blood leading from the kitchen, down the stairs, across the lower level. Forensic testing would confirm it was Gary's blood. They also found a spent bullet on the floor of the basement. So .38 matching the caliber of the bullet found in Gary's rib. But they never found the gun. Melody cooperated with the initial investigation, answering questions, allowing investigators to test her hands for accelerants. The tests came back negative. Scott also submitted to testing. Also negative. But the interviews revealed fractures in the family that ran deep. Scott told investigators something significant. There was a gun missing from the property. A .38 caliber handgun that he had seen in the basement, but which was now gone. He mentioned this almost immediately, which would later strike some as suspicious. Why would that be the first thing on his mind? As the investigation deepened, Detective Hayes and his team uncovered the extent of Melody's affair with Rusty Barton. When first questioned, Melody denied having any extramarital relationships. Then she admitted to the affair, but claimed it had ended a year before Gary's death. This, investigators would prove, was a lie. Phone records showed thousands of texts and calls between Melody and Rusty right up until the time of Gary's death. Rusty Barton himself would become a crucial witness. Investigators tracked him down in Tennessee and brought him in for questioning. What he told them was damning. Rusty said that on July 4th, the day after Gary was last seen alive, Melody called him. During that phone conversation, Rusty asked where Gary was. According to Detective Hayes' testimony, Melody's response was chilling. He's on the burn pile. This statement came before Gary's remains were officially discovered, before the family had supposedly found him. Melody already knew there were other pieces of evidence that pointed toward Melody. In her purse, investigators found a credit card in Rusty Barton's name. They found evidence that she had been planning a life with Rusty, possibly planning to leave Gary once she had secured her financial future. Gary's life insurance policies were substantial, totaling over $2 million. Melody was listed as the sole beneficiary, but the investigation was complicated by another factor. The family itself was divided on who was guilty. Scott, Chris, and Emily, 3 of the 4 Ferris children, believed their mother had killed their father. They said as much to investigators and would later testify to that effect. But Amanda, the youngest, stood by her mother. She believed in Melody's innocence completely. This division would tear the family apart in ways that went beyond the crime itself. The investigation took nearly a year. During that time, the house on Purcell Lane sat empty at times, a crime scene marked by tragedy. The property was eventually listed for sale at $1.295 million, though by then it carried the weight of what had happened there. In June 2019, almost exactly 1 year after Gary's body was found, Cherokee County authorities arrested Melody Ferris. She was in Tullahoma, Tennessee, staying with a friend. In fact, she was with Rusty Barton. Deputies arrested her without incident and extradited her back to Georgia. She was charged with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, concealing the death of another, and making false statements to police. Melody's legal team consisted of attorneys Manny Aurora and Michael Ray. From the beginning, they maintained that Melody was innocent. When she was arrested, one of her attorneys told reporters that the family supported her. But Chris Ferris, the eldest son, quickly contradicted that claim. "Our father was the best person in the world," he told journalists. "This is very embarrassing for our family." Melody was granted a $250,000 bond in November 2019, with strict conditions. She had to surrender her passport, wear an ankle monitor, adhere to a curfew, and stay with her daughter Amanda in Hall County. She was forbidden from contacting any witnesses. For the next 5 years, while the legal process ground slowly forward, Melody lived under these restrictions. The case finally went to trial in October 2024. By then, more than 6 years had passed since Gary's death. The wounds in the family had not healed. If anything, they had deepened. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Megan Frankish and Deputy Chief Assistant District Attorney Jeffrey Fogus. In their opening statement, they were unequivocal. Fogus pointed at Melody Ferris and told the jury, "The answer to the question, who did it, sits right there." The state's case rested on several pillars of evidence. First, the physical evidence. Gary's blood throughout the house, the bullet in his rib, the spent bullet on the floor, the 33 pounds of remains in the burn pile. Second, the cell phone evidence. Investigators had analyzed tower records and determined that Gary's phone stopped moving after the time prosecutors believed he was killed. But then, strangely, the phone showed movement after that point. Movement on the property. The prosecution argued that only one person could have been moving that phone: Melody. Third, there was the statement to Rusty Barton. "He's on the burn pile," before anyone else supposedly knew. Fourth, the financial motive. Gary controlled all the money. Melody wanted financial freedom. With Gary dead, she would inherit everything: the property, the life insurance, the assets. The prosecution called 36 witnesses over the course of the trial. They introduced more than 1,200 pieces of evidence. Angela Phillips, Gary's assistant, testified about their relationship and about Gary's suspicions about Melody. She described that haunting conversation about Dateline. She recalled calling Melody after Gary's death and asking how he ended up in the burn pile. Melody had suggested he might have had one of his spells and fallen in. But Angela testified that Gary's spells were never severe enough for that. And when she asked about an autopsy, Melody's response made her blood run cold. "Oh, there's not enough remains for an autopsy." Ted Wiley, a man who had a 4-year affair with Melody from 2008 to 2010, testified about their relationship. Rusty Barton took the stand and confirmed the affair. The phone calls, the plans they had discussed, but perhaps most painful were the testimonies from the Ferris children. Chris, Scott, and Emily all took the stand and testified, in effect, against their mother. They described the family tensions, the fights over money, their father's generosity, and their mother's resentment. The defense team, led by Michael Ray, presented a different theory. They argued that Scott Ferris was the real killer. They pointed to several factors. Scott was 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 280 pounds. He was physically capable of moving his father's 300-pound body in a way that the much smaller Melody could never have managed. Scott had military training. He lived on the property. He had access to weapons, and crucially, he had financial dependence on his father, with mounting tensions over money. The defense pointed out that Scott was the one who discovered the body. He was the one who immediately mentioned the missing gun. Was he pointing investigators toward a murder weapon to divert attention? Or was he genuinely trying to help? Michael Ray argued that the investigation had been sloppy. Investigators never tested Scott's room for blood or accelerants. They never thoroughly searched his belongings. They never adequately explained how Melody could have moved Gary's body. The prosecution's theory required Melody to have shot Gary in the basement, then somehow transported his 300-pound body 100 yards to the burn pile. How? The defense also presented an alternate suspect theory involving a missing .38 special handgun that belonged to one of Melody's cousins. The gun had gone missing sometime after the cousin's husband died in 2014, but the cousin only reported it missing in October 2024. During the trial, the timing was suspicious. The defense suggested that Ray faced an uphill battle. The cell phone evidence was damning. The statement to Rusty Barton was difficult to explain away. And the motive, the financial incentive, weighed heavily against Melody. Melody herself never took the stand. This was a strategic decision by her defense team, but it meant the jury never heard directly from her. Instead, she sat in the courtroom day after day, stoic, showing little emotion even as witness after witness described the evidence against her. In the closing arguments, Megan Frankish addressed the jury with force and clarity. She painted a picture of Gary Ferris's last moments. The last thing he saw was staring down the barrel of a .38 revolver in the hands of his bitter wife, who was constantly betraying him, she told the jurors. This was the ultimate betrayal. She reminded them that Gary would never walk through the door again, never meet new grandchildren, never have another chance at life. You don't get to shoot and mutilate your life partner, Frankish said. You don't get to take away the grandfather of your grandchildren. That is not your choice to make. She urged the jury to find Melody Ferris guilty on all counts. The evidence and the law demand it, she concluded. The jury received the case on October 30th, 2024. For 3 days, they deliberated. On the third day, they sent a note to the judge saying they were deadlocked. Judge David L. Cannon, Jr. instructed them to try one more time, and Melody later described those hours as torture. I was absolutely numb, she would say. You don't know what to think. Just a few hours after the judge's instruction, the jury reached a verdict. Guilty. Guilty on all 5 counts. Malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, concealing the death of another, and making false statements. Melody Ferris stood as the verdict was read. Her face remained impassive, betraying no emotion. But inside, as she would later describe, something broke. The sentencing hearing came on December 5th, 2024, in Georgia. A conviction for malice murder carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison. The question was whether Melody would have any possibility of parole. Before the sentence was announced, the court heard a written victim impact statement from one of Gary's children. The statement asked the court to consider the gravity of the crime, the devastating impact on the family, and to ensure that justice was served. No sentence can bring our father back, the statement read, but a just punishment can offer a semblance of closure. 2 friends of Melody spoke on her behalf, but their words seemed to carry little weight against the enormity of what had been proven. And then, in a moment that shocked everyone in the courtroom, Melody Ferris spoke. She had been silent throughout the trial. Now, facing life in prison, she finally revealed what she claimed to be the truth. Not only did I not do this, she said, her voice clear and firm. I know who did. I know Scott killed his father. She accused her son directly, calling his actions unforgivable, saying he had taken Big Daddy from his siblings and family. She said that her mother had told her to take the blame for what happened. It was a stunning accusation, made at the very end, after the verdict had been rendered. Some saw it as a desperate attempt to escape justice. Others wondered if there might be some truth hidden in her words. Judge Cannon sentenced Melody Ferris to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She also received an additional 5 years for concealing Gary's death by burning his remains, and 5 more years for making false statements to police. The sentences for the latter charges would run concurrently. At 64 years old, Melody Ferris would have to serve at least 30 years before being eligible for parole. If she served the full 30 years, she would be 94 years old. Scott Ferris, for his part, sat down with journalists after the trial and categorically denied his mother's accusations. I absolutely had nothing to do with my father's death, he said. And it was 100% Melody Ferris who murdered my father. That is the truth. He explained that he had been an easy target for suspicion because he lived on the property and had military training. But investigators had thoroughly examined his possible involvement and found nothing. He was never charged with any crime related to his father's death. District Attorney Susan K. Treadaway issued a statement after the sentencing. The disturbing facts of this case, complex investigation and long prosecution, have taken the focus away from the fact that an innocent man was brutally murdered and burned on his own property, she said. A good man was lost on that day, and the family was forever divided. Indeed, the Ferris family would never be whole again. 3 of the 4 children believed their mother murdered their father. One daughter, Amanda, continued to believe in her mother's innocence. The siblings were divided, perhaps permanently. Grandchildren would grow up knowing their grandfather was murdered, and their grandmother was in prison for the crime. The 10-acre property on Purcell Lane, that little patch of perfect that the Gary Ferris had worked so hard to build, stood empty for a time, a monument to shattered dreams. The house where a family once lived, where children grew up, where Gary and Melody spent 38 years of marriage, became known only for the terrible thing that happened there. Gary Ferris's body was never given a traditional funeral. There simply wasn't enough remains. His children mourned him without the closure of a proper burial. His friends and colleagues at Burr and Foreman remembered him as brilliant, generous, and hardworking. Tim Inman, who grew up with Gary in Alabama, said, "When I first heard the news, I couldn't believe it. He was just a really, really good guy. He was a genius." The case raised questions that may never be fully answered. How exactly did Gary's body end up on the burn pile? Who moved him? If Melody was guilty, how did she manage to transport a 300-pound man 100 yards? If Scott was involved, why was there no evidence connecting him to the crime scene? The cell phone data convinced the jury. The statement to Rusty Barton convinced them. The financial motive convinced them. But in the quiet hours, in the spaces between certainty and doubt, questions linger. What truly happened on the night of July 3rd, 2018, in that basement, in that house? What took place? Was it premeditated, or did something snap in a moment of rage? Were there really only two people involved, or did someone else play a role that remains hidden? Melody Ferris sits in Arundel State Prison in Habersham County, Georgia, maintaining her innocence, claiming she knows the truth. Scott Ferris maintains his innocence as well, insisting his mother alone is responsible. Amanda Ferris believes her mother, Chris, Scott, and Emily believe their father was murdered by Melody. The truth, whatever it is, lies somewhere in the ashes of that burn pile, in the blood-soaked floors of that basement, in the silence of that July night. Let yourself rest now. Let the story fade like a dream you can barely remember. Gary Ferris wanted to build something perfect for his family. He worked his whole life for it, and in the end, that dream turned to ash and smoke, leaving behind only questions, grief, and a family torn apart forever. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that unfolds slowly, carefully, like pages turning in an old book. One that took place not so long ago in a small coastal town in Florida, where the air smells of salt water and Spanish moss drapes from ancient oak trees. This is the story of Jolene Cummings, a young mother, a talented hairstylist, and a beloved daughter. It's also the story of a woman who wore many faces and many names, who moved through the world like a ghost, leaving questions in her wake. In the heart of Nassau County, Florida, there lived a woman named Jolene Rebecca Jensen. She was born on May 13, 1984, on a spring day that would later become Mother's Day in the year of her disappearance. Her mother, Ann Johnson, remembered the moment Jolene entered the world with perfect clarity. Ann had wanted a daughter so deeply, and when the doctors placed that tiny baby in her arms, she felt her heart expand in ways she never knew possible. Jolene grew up in Hilliard, a small town where everyone knew everyone, where children rode bicycles down quiet streets and neighbors waved from their front porches. Her family called her JoJo, and she was by all accounts a girl filled with light. Anne raised her daughters with love and determination, instilling in them a sense of adventure and independence. Jolene inherited her mother's strength, her willingness to dream big even when life threw obstacles in her path. As Jolene grew into young womanhood, she discovered her passion for making people feel beautiful. There was something almost therapeutic about the work of a hairstylist, the way conversations would unfold naturally while she worked her hands through someone's hair, the trust that formed between stylist and client, the transformation that could happen with just the right cut, the perfect color. After graduating from high school in 2002, Jolene began building her career, learning the craft that would come to define her professional life. But life had other plans first. Not long after graduation, Jolene discovered she was pregnant. She was young, perhaps younger than she'd hoped to be when starting a family, but she embraced motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Her daughter became the center of her world. Though that first relationship didn't last, Jolene never let it diminish her spirit. She was a survivor, a fighter, someone who believed that better days were always ahead if you worked hard enough for them. Years passed. Jolene continued to perfect her skills as a hairstylist, building a reputation in Nassau County for her talent and her warm personality. She had a way of making people feel heard, truly heard. During those hours they spent in her chair, clients would book appointments with her months in advance, not just for her technical skill, but for the experience of being in her presence. And then, in her late 20s, Jolene met Jason Cummings. He was kind to her daughter, treating the little girl as if she were his own. For Jolene, this meant everything. They fell in love, or what felt like love at the time. And in 2012 or 2013, they married. That same year, they welcomed a son into the world. A baby boy who would be joined by a brother about 2 years later, in 2015. Suddenly, Jolene was the mother of 3 children, head of a blended family of 5. She worked long hours at Tangle's Hair Salon in Fernandina Beach, building her clientele through word of mouth and social media, creating a loyal following of customers who trusted only her with their hair. She would post photos of her work online, showcasing dramatic transformations and subtle refinements, her pride in her craft evident in every image. But even as her professional life flourished, her marriage began to crack. By 2017, after several years together, Jolene and Jason decided to separate. The love that had once bound them had eroded under the weight of everyday struggles, disagreements that couldn't be resolved, fundamental incompatibilities that became impossible to ignore. They filed for divorce, but they tried, truly tried, to remain cordial for the sake of their children. They worked out a custody arrangement. They communicated about school events and doctor's appointments. They did their best. By the spring of 2018, Jolene was 33 years old. She was navigating single motherhood, building her business, and looking toward the future. Her mother, Anne, remained one of her closest confidants. They spoke regularly, sharing the mundane details of daily life and the bigger dreams they held for what was to come. Jolene never missed Mother's Day. Never. She always made sure to call her mother, to send flowers, to express her gratitude for the woman who had raised her. May of 2018 should have been a time of celebration. Mother's Day fell on May 13th that year, which also happened to be Jolene's 34th birthday. She had plans to pick up her 3 children from Jason's house in Hilliard on May 12th, spend the weekend with them, and celebrate both occasions together. It should have been a joyful time, a milestone, the kind of weekend that creates lasting memories. But Jolene Cummings never made it to that celebration. And the reason why would unravel a mystery that stretched across decades and revealed a woman living in the shadows. A woman with 18 different names and a past she was desperate to keep hidden. To understand what happened to Jolene Cummings, we must first understand Kimberly Lee Kessler. She was born on May 9th, 1968, in Butler, Pennsylvania, a small town about 35 miles north of Pittsburgh. Butler was the kind of place where people stayed for generations, where family roots ran deep, where everyone knew your name and your business. But Kimberly Kessler didn't want to be known. From an early age, something set her apart. People who knew her in high school would later describe her as odd, secretive, someone who seemed to be hiding even when she had nothing to hide. There were whispers of violence even then, stories of her trying to hit her brother with a baseball bat, tales of a temper that could ignite without warning. As Kimberly grew into adulthood, she remained in Butler, working various jobs, living what seemed like an ordinary life. But inside, something was building, some deep dissatisfaction or fear or need for escape that would eventually consume her. Her relationships were troubled. One former boyfriend would later tell investigators a chilling story about their time together. He said Kimberly could seem kind and normal one moment, then snap if something triggered her. He recalled how she once stabbed him in the chest, how she bit his father in the leg. These weren't minor outbursts. They were violent eruptions that suggested something fundamentally broken in the way she related to other people. Then in July of 2004, when Kimberly was 35 years old, she disappeared. She told family members she was heading south, that she was going to start over with a new identity. An identity she claimed she had gotten from a tombstone. It sounds like something from a movie, doesn't it? But this was real. Kimberly had apparently visited local cemeteries in Butler County, walking among the headstones, looking for names of people who had died, preferably young people whose identities could be stolen without raising immediate red flags. She found what she was looking for in Jennifer Marie Seibert. Jennifer had been just 13 years old when she died in a car accident in Germany in 1987. Her body was brought back to Butler County, Pennsylvania, where she was laid to rest in a local cemetery. Jennifer Seibert's life had ended before it truly began. But her name would live on in a twisted way, stolen by a woman who wanted to erase herself and become someone else. Kimberly's family didn't report her missing until 8 years later, in 2012. When they finally did contact authorities, Pennsylvania State Police quickly determined that this wasn't a case of a missing person in danger. This was a case of a woman who didn't want to be found, as one state trooper later explained. Kimberly had disappeared voluntarily. She had told her family she was running from a former lover, that she needed to hide. Her mother later confirmed that Kimberly had admitted to using aliases to protect herself. But that's only one version of the story Kimberly would tell. She told different tales to different people, weaving elaborate narratives about her past depending on who was listening. To some, she claimed she had run away right after high school and lived under assumed names because she was dating a bank robber in Arizona. To others, she hinted at federal investigations and dangerous ex-boyfriends. The truth was always shifting, always just out of reach. What investigators would eventually discover was this. Between 1996 and 2018, Kimberly Kessler lived under at least 17 or 18 different aliases. She moved to 33 cities across 14 states. She worked a variety of jobs, often as a hairstylist, because it was a profession where you could move from salon to salon without raising too many questions, where cash payments were common, where you could maintain a level of anonymity while still earning a living. She left a trail of confused landlords, concerned employers, and bewildered acquaintances in her wake. One doctor in Minnesota, a man named Bill Dunn, who had rented an apartment to Kimberly when she was going by the name Jennifer Seibert, would later tell investigators that she had obvious personality disorders. He said she had no furniture in her apartment and wouldn't allow him to give her any. She became increasingly paranoid, increasingly dangerous. Eventually, he had to terminate her lease because he didn't feel safe being around her alone. Other people who encountered Kimberly over the years shared similar stories. She would arrive in a town, work for a while, then disappear without warning, often leaving behind unpaid rent or confused coworkers who wondered where she'd gone. She maintained multiple social media profiles under different names. She researched deceased individuals online through websites that documented victims of crimes and accidents. She was meticulous in her deception, careful to never stay in one place too long, never let anyone get too close. By the time she arrived in Fernandina Beach, Florida, in early 2018, Kimberly Kessler had perfected the art of reinvention. She was 50 years old, though she claimed to be younger. She was using the name Jennifer Seibert, the identity she'd stolen from a dead teenager's gravestone 16 years earlier. She had identification documents, a work history she could reference, enough surface credibility to get hired at a small hair salon. That salon was called Tangles, and it was located in a modest strip mall in Fernandina Beach, a coastal town in Nassau County with a population of around 12,000 people. It was the kind of place where tourists came to enjoy the beaches, where locals knew each other by name, where a hair salon could thrive on steady, repeat business from loyal clients. When Jennifer Seibert interviewed for a position at Tangles, she seemed qualified. She had experience. She was polite. The salon owner hired her, and Jennifer began working alongside the other stylists, including Jolene Cummings. From the very beginning, something was off. The other employees noticed it. Jolene noticed it especially. There was something about Jennifer that didn't quite add up. Something in the way she deflected personal questions, the way she kept to herself, the inconsistencies in the stories she told about her past. Jolene, who was intuitive about people, who spent her days listening to clients share their deepest concerns and secrets, sensed that Jennifer Seibert was not who she claimed to be. The tension between them grew. Jolene began to question Jennifer more directly. She told coworkers she wanted to search online for criminal records, to see if Jennifer's name would come up in any databases. She told at least one friend that she didn't trust Jennifer, that there was something wrong, something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Jolene Cummings was right to be suspicious, but she couldn't have known just how dangerous her instincts would prove to be, or how her decision to confront the truth would set in motion a series of events that would end in unimaginable tragedy. Saturday, May 12th, 2018, started like any other workday at Tangles Hair Salon. The spring air was warm, typical for that time of year in Florida. where the humidity begins to build even as the worst of summer's heat is yet to arrive. Jolene Cummings arrived at the salon, ready to work through her appointments, knowing that her shift would end at 5 p.m., and that she needed to drive to Hilliard to pick up her children from Jason's house afterward. She had plans for the weekend, plans that included celebrating her birthday and Mother's Day with her 3 kids, the people who mattered most in her world. Jennifer Seibert was also scheduled to work that day. The salon owner had assigned them shifts together, 2 stylists working side by side in the modest space. The air between them was tense. There had been conflicts in recent days and weeks, disagreements about work, about boundaries, about trust. Jolene had made her suspicions about Jennifer increasingly clear. She had questioned her background. She had expressed doubts. And for a woman like Kimberly Kessler, whose entire existence was built on layers of lies and fabricated identities, this kind of scrutiny was intolerable. The salon closed at 5 p.m. Most of the stylists had left. The last client had been seen. It was just Jolene and Jennifer, alone in the building, as the Florida sun began its descent toward the horizon. What happened in those final hours has never been fully revealed, because the only 2 people who know the complete truth are Jolene Cummings, who cannot speak, and Kimberly Kessler, who has never told the truth about anything in her life. What we do know is this: Jolene Cummings was never seen alive again after that evening. She never showed up to pick up her children. She never called her mother. She never made it home. And when investigators would later examine Tangle's hair salon with forensic tools, they would discover a hair scene that had been hastily cleaned, but not well enough to hide the truth, using luminol, a chemical that makes blood visible even after it's been wiped away. Investigators found blood everywhere, on the walls, on the chairs, on the cabinets, on the sink. The entire salon lit up under the luminol spray, revealing the ghostly evidence of violence, of a struggle, of something terrible that had happened in that space. The blood was tested. It belonged to Jolene Cummings. The amount of blood suggested catastrophic injuries. There was, in the words of one investigator, no doubt that this was not just a crime scene but a homicide scene. Jennifer Seibert disappeared that same evening. She didn't show up for work the next day, Sunday, May 13th. When the salon owner tried to contact her, Jennifer sent a message saying she was leaving town, claiming she was afraid of an ex-boyfriend who was tracking her. It was one more lie in an endless web of deception. But Jennifer had made mistakes, the kind of mistakes that criminals often make when they believe they're smarter than everyone else, when they think they can control every variable, plan for every contingency. She had underestimated the reach of modern surveillance. The network of cameras that exist in almost every public space, capturing every moment, every movement, creating a digital record that cannot be erased. In the early morning hours of May 13th, at 1:17 a.m. to be precise, security cameras at a Home Depot in nearby Yulee captured a figure dressed entirely in black parking a Ford Expedition in the lot. The person exited the vehicle and walked away. The investigators would later identify that vehicle as Jolene Cummings' SUV. The figure in black was Jennifer Seibert, or more accurately, Kimberly Kessler. The cameras followed her as she walked to a nearby gas station. She purchased a bottle of water. She used a credit card, leaving a digital record. She called a taxi, which arrived and picked her up. The taxi driver would later tell investigators that he drove her back to Tangle's hair salon, where she got into her own vehicle and drove away. He remembered her face, remembered the details. He saw scratches on her cheek, marks that looked fresh, that suggested a struggle. On Monday, May 14th, when Jolene failed to show up for work and couldn't be reached by phone, her mother, Ann Johnson, knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. Jolene never missed Mother's Day. She never failed to call, never forgot to send flowers, and she would never ever leave her children wondering where she was without explanation. Ann went to the Nassau County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. The deputies listened to her concerns, heard the edge of panic in her voice, and began their investigation. They went to Jolene's house first. They found it in disarray, signs of a domestic disturbance from days earlier, involving Jolene's boyfriend at the time. But that boyfriend had an alibi. Jason Cummings, her ex-husband, also had an alibi. The investigation quickly eliminated both men as suspects. That's when detectives turned their attention to Tangle's hair salon and to Jennifer Seibert, the last person known to have seen Jolene alive. They went to the salon to question her, but Jennifer had called the owner that same day to say she was quitting, that she was leaving town because she feared an ex-boyfriend was tracking her. The timing was suspicious. The excuse was convenient. Too convenient.
On May 15th, Jolene's Ford Expedition was discovered in the Home Depot parking lot. On May 16th, acting on tips and surveillance footage, investigators found Jennifer Seibert sleeping in her own car at a rest stop along Interstate 95 in St. Johns County. When they approached her vehicle, when they saw her face, they noticed something that confirmed their worst suspicions. She had scratches on her face, visible marks below her left eye, claw marks that let like defensive wounds. She had bandages covering some of the injuries. When asked about them, she claimed she had run into a tree branch. The investigators didn't believe her. They believed those scratches had come from Jolene Cummings fighting for her life in those final moments. Jennifer Seibert was arrested on the spot, initially charged with grand theft auto for stealing Jolene's vehicle. But as the deputies processed her, as they looked into her background, they began to uncover the truth. This woman wasn't Jennifer Seibert. She was Kimberly Lee Kessler, a woman who had been missing from Pennsylvania since 2004. A woman who had lived under 18 different aliases, who had moved through 33 cities in 14 states, who had been running from something, or maybe from herself, for more than 2 decades. In the recorded interview after her arrest, Kimberly seemed almost relieved to drop the pretense. She admitted her real identity. She said she was 50 years old and had been running from the FBI for over 25 years. She made jokes about her middle name. She was oddly lighthearted, chatting casually with investigators. But when they steered the conversation toward Jolene Cummings, when they pressed her about what had happened at the salon, her demeanor changed completely. She shut down. She said she wanted a lawyer. The interview ended. The forensic evidence, however, continued to mount. Investigators searched Kimberly's car. Inside, they found multiple false identification documents, aliases she'd used over the years, evidence of her elaborate deception. They also found something far more damning: scissors with Jolene's blood on them. The very tools of a hairstylist trade, now instruments in a murder. They found boots with Jolene's blood. They found socks with her DNA. The investigation expanded. Detectives obtained a search warrant for a storage unit Kimberly had been renting. Inside, they found more traces of Jolene's blood. They found one of Jolene's fingernails in a nearby trash bin. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. Kimberly had attacked Jolene at the salon, killed her in that space, then attempted to clean up the crime scene. But you can't truly erase blood. You can wipe it away, scrub it down. But the residue remains, invisible to the naked eye but blazingly obvious under the right forensic tools. The surveillance footage told the rest of the story. In the days following Jolene's disappearance, cameras captured Kimberly making multiple trips to dispose of evidence. She was seen throwing large trash bags into dumpsters behind the salon. She was seen purchasing cleaning supplies, an electric carving knife, zip ties, ammonia, and large garbage bags at local stores. The timeline was damning. She had bought these items in the 24-hour period when Jolene vanished. But perhaps most chilling was Kimberly's internet search history. 2 weeks before Jolene disappeared, Kimberly had begun researching how to get away with murder. She searched terms like cow, worker guilty of murder, missing person, body not found. She was planning, preparing, studying how others had tried to commit this kind of crime and what had happened to them. After Jolene was reported missing, Kimberly searched for her name 457 times over a 48-hour period. She searched Jolene Cummings, no body, no crime, trying to gauge whether investigators had any leads, whether her plan was working, whether she could actually get away with murder if the body was never found. It was clear that this was not a crime of passion, not a sudden explosion of violence. This was premeditated. This was planned. Kimberly Kessler had decided to kill Jolene Cummings, and she had taken steps to ensure she could dispose of the body in a way that might never lead back to her. On May 22nd, just days after Kimberly's arrest, Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper held a press conference. His words were measured, but clear. He said they had evidence that led them to believe Jolene was not alive. He stopped short of calling it a murder investigation at that moment, but everyone understood what he meant.
Then, in September of 2018, the charges were upgraded. Kimberly Kessler was indicted for first-degree murder. In the death of Jolene Cummings, she had stolen Jolene's car. She had stolen her life. And now she would face justice for it. But even in custody, Inslee continued to manipulate and disrupt. She refused to cooperate with her own defense attorneys. She began a hunger strike, dropping from nearly 200 pounds down to a skeletal 74 pounds. So emaciated that she had to be wheeled into court, she stripped naked in her cell. She smeared feces on the walls. She threw feces at jail employees. She was charged with additional crimes for battery against guards. During court appearances, she would scream and rant, insisting that her former public defender was Jolene Cummings' cousin, a claim that was investigated and found to be completely false. Her behavior was so disruptive that she had to be removed from the courtroom repeatedly, eventually being held in a separate room during proceedings while connected via video. Defense attorneys argued she was mentally incompetent to stand trial. Doctors evaluated her. She was sent to Florida State Hospital for treatment. In July of 2019, a judge declared her incompetent, but by March of 2020, that ruling was reversed. The judge determined that Kimberly's behavior was volitional, meaning it was intentional, a choice she was making to disrupt the proceedings rather than evidence of true mental illness. He said her actions were the result of a personality disorder, not psychosis or incompetence. She was, he decided, capable of understanding the charges against her and assisting in her own defense, even if she chose not to do so. Finally, in late November of 2021, more than 3.5 years after Jolene disappeared, jury selection began for Kimberly Kessler's trial. The process took several days. Eventually, a panel of 12 jurors and 2 alternates were chosen, 8 women and 4 men, including 4 people of color. They would be tasked with determining Kimberly's fate. The trial began on December 6, 2021, at the Nassau County Courthouse. Prosecutors laid out their case methodically, walking the jury through the timeline, the evidence, the surveillance footage. They showed the jurors the blood evidence from the salon, the scissors and boots with Jolene's DNA, the internet searches that demonstrated premeditation. They called witnesses who testified about the tension between Jolene and Kimberly, about Jolene's suspicions in her final days, about the scratches on Kimberly's face when she was arrested. They explained how Kimberly had purchased cleaning supplies and tools that could be used to dismember a body. They showed receipts for the electric carving knife, the zip ties, the garbage bag. They played the surveillance footage of Kimberly dumping large trash bags into dumpsters, struggling with their weight, clearly disposing of something significant. The defense had a difficult task. They couldn't deny the physical evidence. The blood was Jolene's. The DNA was conclusive. The surveillance footage was clear, so they argued instead that the murder was not premeditated, that Jolene and Kimberly had gotten into a physical altercation, and that Kimberly had acted in self-defense. They suggested the blood evidence was the result of Kimberly defending herself, not evidence of a planned attack. It was a weak argument, and the jury saw through it. On December 9th, after just over an hour of deliberations, the verdict came back: guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of grand theft auto. Kimberly Kessler showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Her family, or what remained of them, who were willing to attend, sat in stunned silence. But Ann Johnson, Jolene's mother, finally felt a measure of justice. She had waited 3.5 years for this moment. On January 27th, 2022, Kimberly Kessler was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's words were final. She would never walk free again. She would spend the rest of her life in the Florida State prison system, a small cell replacing the endless movement and reinvention that had defined her adult life. Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper held another press conference after the sentencing. His words were blunt, unvarnished. He said he believed this wasn't Kimberly's first murder. He called her evil, evil in the flesh. He expressed his conviction that somewhere in her decades of movement across the country, in those 33 cities and 14 states, there were likely other victims, other people who crossed her path and paid the ultimate price. There's no proof of other murders. Kimberly has never been charged with any other homicides. But the sheriff's words echoed what many people had been thinking. How does someone become this? How does a woman spend more than 20 years hiding, running, reinventing, committing fraud and identity theft on a massive scale, without other serious crimes occurring along the way? There were hints in the evidence. Interviews with people from Kimberly's past revealed disturbing patterns. A former boyfriend who said she stabbed him in the chest. Stories of violence against family members. A landlord who said he felt unsafe around her. Unexplained deaths in cities where she had lived, including questions about two men whose deaths occurred in places Kimberly had been. These connections were investigated, but never resulted in charges. The evidence wasn't strong enough. The timeline was too vague, and without Kimberly's cooperation, which would never come, the truth of her full history may never be known. Kimberly Kessler filed appeals, as most convicted murderers do. She claimed her trial was prejudiced, that evidence should have been suppressed, that she was framed. In her lengthy court filings, she insisted there was no case, no evidence, that everything was circumstantial. She pointed out correctly that Jolene's body had never been found. She directed blame at others, at Jolene's boyfriend at the time, at the salon for not having working security cameras inside the building. But the appeals were denied. The conviction was affirmed by the 5th District Court of Appeals in October of 2023. The Florida Supreme Court dismissed her review in March of 2024. The legal system had spoken. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury's verdict was sound. Today, Kimberly Kessler remains incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. She is 57 years old as of this recording. She will die in prison. The woman who spent decades hiding behind false names, moving from city to city, reinventing herself whenever the walls began to close in, is now confined to a space she cannot escape, living under her true name, her real identity finally exposed for the world to see. But this story isn't really about Kimberly Kessler, is it? This story is about Jolene Cummings. It's about a woman who worked hard, who loved her children fiercely, who built a career one client at a time, who dreamed of a better future even when life was difficult. It's about a daughter who never forgot Mother's Day, who sent flowers and made phone calls and expressed gratitude for the woman who raised her. Jolene's body has never been found. Despite extensive searches, including a 7-day effort at a landfill where FBI teams sifted through 3,300 tons of garbage, her remains have never been recovered. Investigators believe Kimberly dismembered Jolene's body at the salon, placed the remains in trash bags, and disposed of them in dumpsters that were then transported to landfills. Given the volume of waste and the decomposition that occurs in those conditions, it's likely Jolene's remains will never be located. For Ann Johnson, this has been the hardest part. She has no grave to visit, no place to lay flowers, no physical location where she can feel close to her daughter. Mother's Day is especially difficult. Every year on May 13th, Anne has to face the dual weight of celebrating what should be her daughter's birthday while mourning her absence. It's a day of joy and sorrow intertwined, impossible to separate. But Anne has chosen not to let grief consume her completely. In the years since Jolene's murder, Anne has worked to create something positive from tragedy. She runs a Facebook group that provides prayers and healing for other families who have lost loved ones to violence. She has found strength in her faith, believing that forgiveness frees you from the past, that holding on to hatred only hurts yourself. She has been on a journey of self-growth, working to be the best version of herself for her remaining family, for Jolene's children, who still need her. Jolene's 3 children are growing up without their mother. They were young when she disappeared, the youngest just a toddler, the oldest barely in elementary school. They don't have her there to help with homework, to attend school plays, to celebrate birthdays and holidays, to guide them through the complicated journey of growing up. But they have their grandmother. They have extended family who keep Jolene's memory alive, who tell stories about her, who show them pictures and remind them that she loved them more than anything in this world. Jolene's friends remember her too. They describe her as beautiful inside and out, someone who put her children first, who was a great listener, who made people feel valued and heard. Her clients at Tangle's hair salon mourned her loss, many of them struggling to find someone they trusted as much as they had trusted Jolene with something as personal as their appearance. The community of Fernandina Beach in Nassau County was shaken by this crime. It was a small town where people felt safe, where you could leave your doors unlocked, where violent crime was rare. The idea that someone could work alongside others for weeks, hiding such darkness, planning such violence, was deeply disturbing. It shattered the sense of security, the belief that you could always tell who was dangerous and who was safe. But communities heal slowly, imperfectly. Life goes on. Tangle's hair salon continued to operate, though the memory of what happened there will never fully fade. New stylists came to work there, unaware at first of the tragedy that unfolded in that space, then learning the story and carrying it with them as they went about their work. Jolene's case has been featured on numerous true crime programs, including ABC's 2020, which aired an episode called The Final Cut in November of 2025. Her story has been told on podcasts, in news articles, in social media posts. Each telling serves as a reminder of her life, of what was taken from her, and of the danger that can hide behind a friendly face. The case also highlighted important issues about identity theft and fraud. Kimberly Kessler was able to operate under false identities for more than 2 decades, moving across state lines, working jobs, renting apartments, all while using stolen names. The fact that she could do this for so long reveals gaps in our systems, in the way we verify identities, in the communication between states and law enforcement agencies. Reforms have been discussed, though implementation is slow and complicated. There's a broader lesson here too, one that's uncomfortable to confront. We like to think we can identify dangerous people, that there are signs we can recognize, red flags that will warn us before it's too late. But Kimberly Kessler worked as a hairstylist, a profession built on trust and intimacy. She stood next to clients for hours, making small talk, building rapport. Most people who encountered her over the years had no idea they were dealing with someone capable of murder. Jolene Cummings did sense something wrong. Her intuition told her that Jennifer Seibert was not who she claimed to be. She voiced her concerns to coworkers. She planned to investigate, but even with those suspicions, she couldn't have imagined the depth of the deception or the danger she was in. And by the time the truth became clear, it was too late. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. Tonight we're going to explore a story that speaks to something many of us fear, the moment when the system meant to protect us fails. This is a story about a woman named Charity, a mother who saw what was coming, who reached out for help, and who fought with everything she had to protect her children. Tonight we'll walk through her story together, slowly, carefully, with respect for her memory. In the small town of Bonanza, Arkansas, nestled along the border with Oklahoma, there's a quiet street called First Avenue. It's the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors, where children play in yards, and where life moves at a gentle pace. The town itself has only about 600 residents, a former coal mining community that's seen better days, but still holds on to that small town charm. And a house on this street, in the 1100 block of First Avenue, lived a woman named Charity Bielis. She was 40 years old, a mother, and by all accounts, someone who loved her family deeply. Charity had an older son named John, who was 24, and twin children, a boy and a girl, both 6 years old. Born in 2019, these twins were described by everyone who knew them as precious, innocent, full of life. Charity's life, like many lives, was complicated. She had been married to a man named Randall Bielis, Dr. Randall Bielis, to be precise. He was a family medicine physician who had practiced in Fort Smith, Arkansas for over 30 years. He had an office on Rogers Avenue, saw patients, maintained his medical license. To the outside world, he appeared to be a respected member of the community. But inside the walls of their home, something very different was happening. Let's go back to February 16th, 2025. It was a Sunday, inside the Bielis home in Bonanza. Witnesses would later say that an incident occurred, one that would set in motion a series of events that would ultimately end in tragedy. According to court documents, on that February day, Randall allegedly strangled Charity. This wasn't an argument that got out of hand. This wasn't a moment of lost temper. The documents say this happened in front of their children, the 6-year-old twins who should have been playing, laughing, being children. The charges filed against Randall were serious: aggravated assault on a family member, third-degree domestic battery, 2 counts of third-degree endangering the welfare of a minor. The court record stated that he choked Charity, that he caused her physical harm, that he did this while their young children watched. Charity's father, Randy Powell, would later tell reporters what his daughter told him about that day. The fear in her voice, the knowledge that this man she'd married, this father of her children, had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. On March 5th, 2025, less than 3 weeks after the incident, Charity filed for divorce. In her filing, she asked for full custody of the twins. She cited the domestic violence charges pending against Randall. She told the court about the violence in her home, about her fears for her children's safety, and there was a no-contact order. The court said Randall couldn't contact Charity or any members of her family unless authorized by a valid court order, and only for visitation purposes. The system, it seemed, was working. Charity was being protected. The children were being shielded. But Charity knew something that the court documents couldn't fully capture. She knew the man she'd lived with. She knew what he was capable of. And she was afraid. In the months that followed, Charity did everything she could think of to protect herself and her children. She reached out to people in positions of power, people who might be able to help. One of those people was Arkansas State Senator Terry Rice. Senator Rice would later confirm that Charity came to see him earlier in the year. They sat down and Charity told him plainly. She feared for her life. She feared for her children's lives. She believed that Randall was going to kill her. Senator Rice listened. He did what he could. He connected Charity with resources through the Arkansas State Police Crimes Against Children Division. He tried to help her navigate a system that seemed to Charity to be protecting the wrong person. In August of 2025, something interesting happened. Charity was scrolling through Facebook when she saw a post from a local news station, 5 News, about a completely unrelated case. But the story must have resonated with her because she did something she rarely did. She commented publicly about her own situation. Her words are worth hearing in full. She wrote, "I'm living this battle right now. I am the victim, yet I've been treated like the problem while the criminal, a local doctor, is being shielded by the very system that's supposed to protect us. I've tried to reach prosecuting attorney Daniel Shue, but he won't even accept a letter from me. My voice as the victim has been shut out. This is not just about me. This is about a system that protects offenders and rejects victims. Lives are at stake, including the lives of young children." She ended her comment by saying, "Transparency matters. Accountability matters. Victims matter." Reading those words now, knowing what would happen just months later, they feel almost prophetic. Charity was telling the world what was happening to her. She was putting it out there, making it public, perhaps hoping that sunlight would somehow protect her. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Randall was moving through the court system. And as often happens in these cases, things changed. In October of 2025, Randall reached an agreement with prosecutors. The original charges, aggravated assault, domestic battery, endangering minors, were reduced. He pleaded guilty to third-degree battery and misdemeanor. His sentence? A 1-year suspended imposition of sentence. He was ordered to pay $1,500, plus $150 in court fees. The no-contact order remained in place. But here's something interesting. The judgment order showed that Charity approved the sentencing. We don't know what went into that decision. Maybe she was tired of fighting. Maybe she hoped that this would be enough. Maybe she believed that with the divorce proceeding, with the court orders in place, she and her children would finally be safe. Her older son, John Powell, would later say that his mother fought for 9 months to save her life, and the lives of her babies. 9 months of legal battles, of court appearances, of fear and hope tangled together. December 2nd, 2025, a Monday, at the Sebastian County Courthouse in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Charity and Randall attended their final divorce hearing. This was at the end of their marriage, the final determination of custody, of property, of all the things that get divided when a family breaks apart. Details of what happened in that courtroom aren't publicly available, The Sebastian County Circuit Court clerk confirmed that documents surrounding the divorce should have been available on Court Connect, the online system for accessing court records. But strangely, there are no documents available referencing the final divorce hearing or its outcome. What we do know is this. Randall's attorney later stated that his client was awarded joint custody of the twins during that December 2nd hearing. The children, he said, were set to spend more time with their father moving forward. We don't know how Charity felt walking out of that courthouse. We don't know if she was relieved that it was finally over, or terrified of what joint custody might mean. We don't know if she went home that night and tucked her twins into bed, kissing their foreheads, grateful for one more night with them safe in her home. What we do know is that it was the last night Charity would ever spend with her children. December 3rd, 2025. A Wednesday morning, at about 9:30 a.m., a call came into the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office dispatcher. Someone was requesting a welfare check on a home in the 1100 block of First Avenue in Bonanza. We don't know who made that call. The Sheriff's Office hasn't released that information, but someone was worried. Someone thought something might be wrong. Deputies from the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office and officers from the Bonanza Police Department responded to the address. It was Charity's home, the place where she lived with her 6-year-old twins. When they arrived, they knocked on the door. No one answered. They knocked again. Still nothing. The house was silent. 2 workers who were at the property that day let law enforcement inside, and what they found would shake this small Arkansas community to its core. Inside the home, deputies found 3 bodies. Charity Bayless, age 40, her 6-year-old son, her 6-year-old daughter. All 3 had been shot. All 3 were deceased. The sheriff's office would later release a statement saying, upon entering the home, they found 3 deceased individuals, a woman and 2 deceased children. It was apparent that the 3 had gunshot wounds. The bodies were transported to the Arkansas State Crime Lab in Little Rock for autopsies to determine the exact causes of death. Search warrants were written and executed. Evidence was collected from the home. Interviews began. The investigation was just beginning. But for Charity and her children, everything was already over. When news of the deaths reached Charity's family, the grief was overwhelming. Her father, Randy Powell, tried to put his feelings into words. When he spoke to reporters, "I don't know how to describe it, sir," he said. Tears heartbroken, unbelievable, and anger, thinking maybe I was dreaming that somebody was having a nightmare in that way. Maybe somebody would wake me up, and this wouldn't be true. He described the emotional roller coaster. One minute you're mad, next you're sad, crying. It was every emotion you could think of. Charity's older son, John Powell, spoke about his mother and his young siblings. Those kids were precious, he said. Real precious. And they were innocent. John made it clear what he believed. My mother fought for 9 months, the last 9 months, to save her life and them babies, and nothing happened, he said. Now all 3 of them is dead. He spoke about his mother's love for her children. I know my mom would have fought tooth and nail to protect them, he said, adding that maybe that's why she was found with 2 gunshot wounds. And John said something else. Something that showed just how deep the fear ran in this family. Well, I'm scared to death for my life at this point, he said. Randy Powell was more direct about what he believed happened. He told reporters that there was no doubt in Charity's mind that her ex-husband was going to kill her. He said there was no one else who had any reason to harm Charity or her children. He believed that Randall killed his daughter for financial gain, and because of hatred. Here's where the timeline gets particularly interesting and troubling. On December 4th, 2025, the day after Charity and her children were found dead, Randall's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the divorce case. The reason given: the plaintiff passed away. Think about that timing. Charity's body hadn't even been released from the medical examiner's office. Her family was still in shock, trying to process what had happened. And already a legal motion was being filed to dismiss the divorce. Randy Powell had his own interpretation of this action. He believed that Randall filed for dismissal to get everything Charity would have gotten in the divorce. If the divorce was dismissed rather than finalized, the property division, the custody arrangements, all of it would be voided. And as Randall would potentially be Charity's surviving spouse, unless he was charged with her murder, he could inherit her estate. So where does the investigation stand? As of now, no arrests have been made. The Sebastian County Sheriff's Office has been careful in their statements. They've said that everyone they've interviewed is cooperating. They've said the investigation is ongoing. They've said they're waiting for autopsy results and continuing to review evidence. Notably, in early statements, deputies said that Randall Ballas was not a suspect. His attorney, Michael D. Pierce, released a statement saying, Mr. Ballas has been cooperative with law enforcement and fully supports the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office investigation. We hope that the Sheriff's Office finds the truth about what happened to Mrs. Charity Ballas and their children. The attorney also confirmed that Randall had been awarded joint custody during the December 2nd hearing, and that the children were set to spend more time with him. Here's something else worth noting. According to the Arkansas Department of Health, Randall Ballas still maintains an active medical license. It's set to expire in February of 2027. As we come to the end of Charity's story, it's important to acknowledge what we don't know. We don't know who killed Charity and her children. We don't know if this case will ever be solved. We don't know if justice will be served. What we do know is that a woman who begged for help, who told authorities she feared for her life, who did everything the system asked her to do, that woman and her 2 innocent children are gone. We know that Charity reached out to a state senator, that she posted on social media, that she tried to contact the prosecuting attorney, that she filed for divorce, that she sought protective orders, that she fought, as her son John said, tooth and nail for 9 months to protect herself and her babies. And we know that none of it was enough. In the days after the murders, residents of Bonanza left flowers near the house on First Avenue, a memorial to 3 lives lost. Deputies maintained periodic patrols in the area. The small community of 600 people tried to make sense of something that made no sense at all. Charity's family is now left with the impossible task of planning 3 funerals, of mourning 3 people who should still be here, of living with the knowledge that Charity saw this coming and couldn't stop it. John Powell said he's now scared for his own life. Randy Powell cycles between anger and grief, unable to find solid ground in his emotions. They're both left asking the same questions. Why didn't anyone listen? Why wasn't more done to protect Charity and the children? How did the system fail them so completely? Charity's case is, tragically, not unique. It joins countless other stories of domestic violence victims who knew they were in danger, who asked for help, who tried to work within the system, and who died anyway. These cases reveal the gaps in our protection systems. The way charges get reduced. The way no contact orders can't really protect someone from a determined attacker. The way courts balance parental rights against safety concerns. The way victims' voices get lost in legal procedures. Charity wrote in her Facebook comment that she felt like the system was shielding the offender while treating her, the victim, like the problem. She wrote that her voice had been shut out. She wrote that lives were at stake. She was right about that last part. Tonight, as we close this story, let's take a moment to remember Charity Ballas, not just as a victim in a true crime story, but as a person, a mother who loved her children, a woman who fought for her safety and theirs, someone who reached out for help and hoped desperately that help would come. And let's remember her twins, 2 6-year-old children who should be in 1st grade right now, who should be learning to read, making friends, losing teeth, dreaming about what they'll be when they grow up. Let's remember that behind every true crime story, there are real people, real families, real loss that can never be undone. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be protected. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.